had an email the other day and it really kind of triggered me. And so I want to take a walk with you and just talk about this topic, especially in the space of breath work and, in the world of the language of breath. As I train the next generation of breath workers, there's a lot of talk about being vulnerable. And there's even a lot of talk in men's circles where it's like men need to be vulnerable. In order to be strong, we have to be vulnerable. Now, as is the case with most things, everything gets oversimplified. And I want to talk about this. I need to weigh in on this topic of vulnerability. Now, the word vulnerable is like a lot of words. It's been used so much in the health and wellness space and the self-improvement space that I think it's lost all meaning. I think people just keep saying it, and it's just like, oh, man, it was super great. It tasted good and it was vulnerable. Like it's almost like it's just this other tagline word. But if you look at the root word, vulnerable, if you go back to the Latin root word, it's to be woundable. Vulnerable means to be woundable, right? To be able to take on wounds. And quite literally, being vulnerable can be a terrible thing. Being vulnerable means you're open to attack. So there's a reason why being vulnerable is something that is difficult to be. And if you think about why it's so difficult to open up, when we say I'm going to be open up and I'm going to be vulnerable, it's because we've been wounded before, right? I don't know of any human being who's made it through middle school without being wounded. I know I was bullied. I know my son he's 8 years old, and he's having to put up with bullies and things like that at school. That's just part of being a human being. We've received wounds, and this is why we have defenses. There is nothing wrong with that, friends, okay? So when people talk about being vulnerable, hey, you should always be vulnerable. You don't want to be vulnerable all the time. And if you are a person who wants to take responsibility for your family, which is something, any husband or, if you're a man, because this is often something that's pointed towards men. And we can talk about it with women too, but, I often hear it in the men's circles, how men need to be more vulnerable. Well, do you really want to be open to attack while you're trying to take care of your family? So there is a lot of value to not being vulnerable, okay? When we are vulnerable in the presence of danger, that's when we are able to be wounded. That's whenever we can be traumatized. And most of the people I work with, and my breath workers, for the language of breath, most of the people we work with who are experiencing lowercase trauma or, capital T trauma, or have experienced it in the past, it's a matter of, I was vulnerable when no one was there for me. I was vulnerable when I had no defenses. There was nothing I could do, and I was vulnerable. Does that say, okay, well, there's obviously an issue with being vulnerable, right? When we talk about being vulnerable, and this is the case when we do breathwork retreats, this is the case when I train language of breath workers, we're talking about being vulnerable in safety. And you have to feel safe in order for this vulnerable time to be profitable, to be beneficial. You have to feel safe. Now, the problem happens when you go to the retreat or you go to vacation or you're with loved ones and you actually are safe, but you have a hard time bringing your guard down. This is when we should be able to say, I don't have to have my guard up. Yes, I've been hurt before, but I'm in a safe place, so I can be vulnerable. And when we can be vulnerable in the presence of safety, that's when healing happens. That's when connection happens. That's when you can really fall in love with someone. That's whenever you can trust someone to tell and say, listen, I need to talk to somebody, because I know that I can be safe with you. I know that I can be safe in this group. The problem comes when we're so used to being guarded that we don't even know how to become vulnerable, even in the presence of safety. Now, in those cases, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. This is what we work with in the language of breathworker school. This is what we work with in this space of health and wellness, or at least we should be working with. It's not as simple as just be vulnerable, man. Just let your guard down. That's how I was hurt before. Tell me to let my guard down. That's how I can really receive injury. Prove to me I'm safe. So we can do that by changing our environments, right? Okay, I'm in a different environment. I'm around people I love. Why can't I let my guard down? There is where breathwork really comes into play. We have to learn how to speak to the unconscious. And a lot of people are still stuck with the old, like, it's just your nervous system, man. You just gotta, you do your breath work, and then you can remote control your nervous system. Yeah, your nervous system is a huge part of it. But there's more to you than just that. You're not just a machine where there's like a button and stuff. There is a very complex part of you that is a bunch of complex unconscious processes that are there, that have been put in place eons ago by our ancient ancestors in order to keep us safe. And one of the things that it tries to help us not do is be vulnerable, because vulnerability is a great way to get killed and not be able to reproduce. So our ancestors were at least not vulnerable in a negative way long enough for us to be here, long enough for them to reproduce. So we have been genetically enhanced to avoid being vulnerable. However, being vulnerable is important when you're in safety, because that's the only way you can connect. That's the only way you can really know that you really are safe. I'm safe. I can open up. I can let my guard down. I can really be myself. I don't have to be always guarded all the time. And this is what we do when we train people in the Language of Breathworker program. So if you take my courses, if you're interested in breathwork at all, that's what we do. And if you're interested in being a good friend to somebody, that's what you do. If you're good friends with someone, you at least let them know, hey, nothing's really off bounds. You can talk about whatever you want to talk about. I know that you're a good person. You don't have to be guarded. We can be open with each other. I'm going to tell you a few things. You tell me a few things. And I know it's not going anywhere. I know it's not going to leak out on the internet. I know it's not going to leak in our friend group or whatever. And this, I honestly think that is one of the biggest reasons why we see so many people coming to retreats who are not with people. So many people that come to my retreats come by themselves. Yes, we do have couples. We have families that come. I've had really huge families make it a whole like family vacation. It's really cool. And they're able to be more vulnerable with each other in a retreat. But most people that come to retreats, they're there alone because they know, strangely enough, they know that they can be vulnerable because as soon as they leave, nobody's going to tell their parents or their family or whatever. That's fine too. That's why we create these safe spaces. Anyway, I really wanted to weigh in on this because I received an email about it. I hear it all the time. How about you? Are you able to be vulnerable in the right times? Have you felt vulnerable when you're not safe? How did that feel? And does that prevent you from opening up and letting yourself be vulnerable when you're around people that you know you can be safe with? What are the environments that you know, hey, I can open up? And when is it that you're like, no, I think I'm gonna play it pretty close to the chest. I'm not going to be vulnerable now. Even though everybody says, oh, hey, open up, okay, hey, you can be yourself. I'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to me at jessecoomer.com, languageofbreathcollective.com, and for your first responders, breathworktactics.com. I'd love to hear from you. Reach out. Thanks so much for being here. Please like and subscribe, and go out there and be kind to one another. Let this be a world where maybe you can be the person in someone's life that they say, you know what, I can let my guard down just for a minute, and I can grow, and I can feel more fulfilled as a result. I'll see you guys next week.